Welcome back to the first episode of the Self-Care Zone podcast for 2026. If this is your first time listening, this podcast is for leaders, professionals, and organisations who are done pretending that wellbeing is optional, personal, or something that you deal with after there's already been an incident. And if you're returning, welcome back. You already know that I don't do surface level self-care conversations here. Now, because this is the first episode of the new year, a lot of people are in reset mode. New goals, new intentions, new plans. But here's the truth most workplaces are avoiding. You don't get a clean slate with psychological risk just because it's new calendar year. The risk didn't reset. The law didn't reset. Your duty of care also didn't reset. And that is why this series starts here. This episode is deliberately uncomfortable, not because I enjoy fear-based messaging, but because denial is still widespread and it's costing people far more than they realise. Today we're talking about psychosocial risk as a legal, operational, and leadership issue. And yeah, I've covered this topic before, but we need to have it again. Not as well-being, not as culture, not as resilience, risk, because that's how the regulators are seeing it now. So let me say this clearly. If you're a leader, manager, business owner, or officer, and someone in your workplace experiences psychological injury, we didn't know is no longer a defense. It's not a justification. It's not a learning moment. It's a failure of due diligence. And too many organizations are still acting like psychosocial risk is just something that we'll get to eventually. Eventually is already too late. For years, workplaces treated psychosocial harm like this. If someone struggled, we told them to use the EAP. If morale dropped, we ran a survey. If turnover increased, we blamed this generation. If people burnt out, we praised their dedication on the way out. That model wasn't just ineffective, it was negligent, and regulators are finally caught up. Psychosocial hazards are now recognised under WHS legislation in every Australian jurisdiction. That means the employers have a positive duty to identify hazards, assess risks, implement controls, and review effectiveness. The same framework used for physical safety, same expectations, same scrutiny, same consequences. And this is not about being a good employer. This is about meeting your legal obligations. Here's the part that makes most rooms go quiet when it's said aloud. This is no longer just an organisational issue. It's personal. Officers, directors, executives, and senior leaders have a duty of care to exercise due diligence in relation to psychosocial risk, which means you are expected to understand the hazards, know what controls are in place, ensure those controls are resourced, and verify that they actually work. Delegating this to HR does not protect you. Outsourcing it does not protect you. Good intentions don't protect you. Ignorance is not neutral anymore. It's evidence. One of the most dangerous phrases I still hear is, "We didn't know it was this bad." So let me translate that for you. You had unmanageable workloads. You had chronic understaffing. You had constant time pressure. You had exposure to trauma. You had bullying behaviours that were minimised. You had complaints that went nowhere. You knew, or you should have. The law doesn't care whether harm was intentional. It cares whether it was foreseeable. And most psychosocial harm is painfully foreseeable. Psychological injury claims are increasing. They take longer to resolve. They cost more to insure. They're harder to defend. And they damage organisations quietly and permanently. But the biggest shift is this. Regulators are no longer waiting for harm to occur. They're asking, what systems did you have in place to prevent it? And most organisations don't have an answer they can prove. Let's talk about what doesn't cut it anymore. Staff surveys without action. Wellbeing calendars with no workload changes. Resilience training while job demands stay unreasonable. Policies that exist only to tick a box. That's not risk management. That's performance theatre. And it will not stand up to scrutiny. This isn't about scaring leaders. It's about forcing a shift from comfort to competence. Because when psychosocial risk is managed properly, people don't burn out at the same rate. Turnover stabilises, performance improves, and leaders sleep better at night. But that requires changing how work is designed, not how people cope. This episode is the wake-up call. In the next episode, we'll unpack good intentions but bad outcomes. Why you might look like you're doing good, but it's not moving the needle. We'll talk about why surveys alone fail legislation and what evidence of action actually looks like. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, we might be exposed here, or I know this applies to us, but I don't know where to start, that's exactly the point where you need to stop guessing. I offer discovery calls for organisations and leaders who want clarity around their psychosocial risk exposure and what practical, defensible action actually looks like. This is not a sales pitch. It's a reality check. You'll walk away knowing where your biggest risks are, what matters legally versus what's just noise, and what your next step actually needs to be. You can book a discovery call via the link in the show notes. If you're serious about getting ahead of this, don't wait until someone gets hurt. Before we finish, I want to bring this back to the human side of all of this. Behind every claim, every investigation, every policy failure, there's a person who didn't fall apart overnight. They were worn down slowly by work that asked too much, gave too little, and ignored the warning signs. Psychosocial risk isn't abstract. It shows up in exhaustion, cynicism, sleepless nights, and people quietly questioning whether they can keep going. If you're in a position of influence, what you allow becomes the standard. What you ignore becomes the risk. And what you design determines whether people can stay well doing meaningful work. So as we move into 2026, don't just ask what your organisation needs from its people. Ask what your people need in order to keep showing up without sacrificing themselves in the process. Take care of yourselves first so that you can take care of others. And I'll see you next time.